In July of 2010, Elina Sundberg, a 25-year-old student from Stockholm, Sweden, set out on a short solo trip to the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. She rented a car, checked in at a trailhead, and set off on her hike. She never returned. 7 years later, other hikers found deeply carved numbers on a pine tree. These were the coordinates leading to the place where a notebook wrapped in plastic lay in a stone crevice. A diary that revealed the most eerie secret of the case. In July of 2010, a 25-year-old student from Stockholm, Sweden, Elina Sundberg, set out on a short solo trip to the Rocky Mountains, Colorado. She came to the United States on a summer university exchange program and decided to use a few free days before returning home to see the mountains she had dreamed of since childhood. Her interest was not accidental. Elina studied geography, was interested in natural landscapes, and was writing her thesis on comparing national parks in Europe and North America. She was an experienced traveler. She had hiked in the Carpathians, Norway, and even spent several days alone in the Finnish forests. She wasn't an extreme, but she was confident in her own abilities and loved to challenge herself. For her trip to Colorado, she rented a compact car in Denver and planned a route along a popular trail that was promised as relatively easy, even for first-time hikers in the Rockies. The photos that survived on her camera and phone show a cheerful girl with reddish hair, a light-colored cap, and a large backpack. In one of the last photos, taken by a tourist at the beginning of the trail, she smiles into the lens while holding a plastic water bottle. Another picture, posted on social media the day before she disappeared, shows her car in a parking lot and the caption, "My last route before returning home. I want to remember these mountains forever." The park's registration log confirms that Elina left her signature on the morning of July 11th. In the expected time of return column, she wrote, "Late evening of the same day." It was a one-day hike, covering approximately 12 kilometers each way. According to the ranger who spoke to her that morning, she appeared well prepared, with a map, compass, first aid kit, and food. Other hikers also saw her that day. A couple from Texas recalls overtaking the girl on a narrow section of the trail around noon. She politely gave way and wished them a good day. Her voice sounded cheerful and her steps were confident. Another witness, a student from Colorado Springs, remembers meeting her at an overlook and having a brief conversation about the weather. He recalled that she stopped to take a picture of a distant valley and then continued on her own. All the descriptions agree. She didn't seem confused, she wasn't in a hurry, but she didn't linger either. Her behavior was typical of someone who was just enjoying a mountain day. That evening, the weather in the area deteriorated. According to the weather reports, after 16 o'clock, the sky became overcast and a short but intense thunderstorm with heavy rain began. For the locals, this was a common summer occurrence, but for a loner in the mountains, it could have become a serious obstacle. Did Elina know that the storm was coming? No one can answer for sure. The last confirmed trace of her is a signature in her journal and a few random testimonies from other travelers. Then her route is cut off. The camera she used to take the photos was never found. To her friends and family, she remained a girl who dreamed of seeing Colorado and disappeared in the middle of a clear day. For the locals, she was another mystery of the Rocky Mountains, where the line between beauty and mortal danger is just a step away. When Elina Sundberg didn't return to her hotel in Denver on the evening of July 11th, no one raised the alarm at first. For the receptionist, it seemed like a normal thing. Tourists sometimes stayed a day longer than planned or moved on without warning. However, the next morning it became obvious that something was wrong. The reception received a call from the company where the girl had rented the car. She was supposed to return the car by 10 in the morning, but she didn't show up. Her cell phone was not answering. The family in Stockholm had noticed even earlier that the connection had been cut off. Alina had a habit of sending her mother a short message every night, a few lines about where she was and how she was feeling. The evening of July 11th passed in silence. The next day was the same. The mother had a feeling that she later described as a dull anxiety that does not allow you to breathe. Calls to the Swedish embassy in the United States were the starting point. The diplomats immediately passed the information on to the local Colorado police. The coincidence was too obvious. No contact, overdue return of the car, and a disrupted schedule. On July 12th, in the afternoon, the state police sent rangers to search for the rented car. The database contained the make, color, and license plate number. At about 15 o'clock on the same day, one of the patrols reported that the car was found in a small parking lot near the beginning of a hiking trail in a mountainous area. The car was locked, the windows intact. Inside were empty water bottles, several packages of energy bars, and a state road atlas. No signs of a struggle or haste. The keys and documents remained with the owner. They were not in the car. There were no tracks on the ground around the car due to the rain that had fallen the night before. It looked as if the girl had simply parked, locked the car, and gone for a hike, and never returned. This detail immediately alerted the investigators. Usually tourists, especially lonely ones, would leave at least a note at the hotel reception or a message to their friends. Alina disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, the family insisted on immediate action. The girl's father flew from Sweden to Denver on the night of July 12th to 13th. He brought with him fresh photographs of his daughter and copies of her medical records, which investigators later needed. The first short reports appeared in the press. A young tourist from Sweden went missing while hiking in the Rocky Mountains. The park began collecting data from visitors. The administration checked the registration book, which had her signature on it. There were several other names of tourists nearby who were questioned. They all confirmed that they had seen a red-haired girl with a large backpack walking alone. The description matched, and no disturbing details were mentioned. The police recorded the time. The entrance to the trail was around 9 in the morning. There was no record of any exit. This meant only one thing. She did not return the same day. At the official level, this was not yet considered a criminal case. The initial version sounded simple. The young woman may have gotten lost or injured herself. But the fact that the car had been standing still for 2 days and the owner had not been in touch forced the police to announce the first stage of the search. The facts added up to a disappointing picture. The car was found. There was a minimum of things inside. The phone was silent, and not a single clue as to where the girl was headed, except for a trail that was lost in the mountains. That evening, a temporary police tent was set up in the parking lot near the trailhead. A generator was placed on the ground, yellow tape was unwound, and the car was recorded as material evidence. The empty car, which was silently waiting for its owner, became the first and so far the only material witness to her disappearance. On July 13th, 2010, in the morning, a search and rescue operation was officially launched in Rocky Mountain National Park. An improvised base appeared in the parking lot near the trailhead. Several tents, generators, tables with maps, radios, and equipment for mountain searches. Nearby were police cars, a fire truck, and vans with the emblems of search and rescue units. The authorities immediately emphasized that time was against them. According to official protocols, the chances of finding a person alive decreased sharply after 72 hours from the moment of disappearance. For Alina, the countdown was on the 3rd day. Helicopters began combing the area before dawn. From the air, they saw narrow paths, steep slopes, and areas of dense coniferous forest. The pilots were instructed to look for any traces: colored clothing stains, metal glare, fragments of equipment. The helicopter search lasted for hours, but yielded no results. Groups with experienced rangers went to the ground. They had dogs trained to find scent. The animals were given things from the girls' hotel room to fix the trail, but after a few hundred meters from the parking lot, the scent was lost in the humid air after the storm. The dogs got confused, circled around in a confused manner, and eventually couldn't point in a clear direction. Volunteers also showed up quickly. Locals, students, and tourists who heard the news came with their own flashlights and water bottles. They formed chains and combed through the forest under the guidance of rangers. The atmosphere was both focused and desperate. Everyone realized that a person could survive in the mountains for only a limited time. Alina's father, who had flown in from Sweden, was at the search base. Witnesses recalled that he sat silently by the map on which the officers marked the routes they had traveled. From time to time, he would approach the volunteers, show them photos of his daughter, and ask them to keep going. In the early days, they carefully checked every ravine, every area with fragments of stones. They used thermal imagers, but found nothing. No traces of a fire, no pieces of clothing, no food remains. The mountains were silent. Different versions were heard at the headquarters. Park officials were inclined to two main ones: an accident or a fall into a gorge. The area where Alina disappeared is known for its steep slopes and sudden cliffs. If she had stumbled and fallen down, her body could have remained in an inaccessible crevice. Another version is hypothermia after a thunderstorm. The hiker could have gotten lost, got wet in the rain, and lost strength before reaching the trail. The operation was expanding every day. Groups of climbers were involved in the search, descending into canyons and gorges on ropes. They worked in difficult conditions: slippery stones, the danger of landslides, and the risk to their own lives. But even these efforts brought no results. By the end of the week, the scale of the search had become impressive. More than 100 people were combing different parts of the park at the same time. They used ATVs, drones, and thermal imagers, even special alpine horses, to transport equipment, all in vain. Gradually, the enthusiasm faded. Helicopters flew less and less, and volunteers returned home. No trace of Alina Sundberg ever appeared, neither on the trails nor off them. On the fifth day, the police openly told journalists that the chances of finding the girl alive were minimal. The official line was that it was an accident. The authorities explained, "These mountains are beautiful but dangerous. It's easy to take one step to the side here and it's over." For the family, this statement sounded like a sentence. The father disagreed, asking to continue the search, but the resources were exhausted. By the end of July, the operation was curtailed, leaving only minimal patrolling. The case of the Swedish tourist's disappearance went into the archives under the wording, "A possible accident in the mountains." A story that began with the hope of a short adventure ended in the silence of the Rocky Mountains. 7 years have passed since Alina Sundberg, a 25-year-old student from Stockholm, disappeared in the Rocky Mountains. Her photo of her smiling and carrying a large hiking backpack had long since disappeared from the front pages of newspapers. The police file was in a metal archive box marked "Unsolved." The official conclusion remained unchanged: a likely accident. For most, it was another tragedy among dozens of similar ones in these mountains. Alina's parents had been coming to Colorado for several years in a row. They hiked the same trails, posted postcards with her photo, and talked to journalists. But after the 5th year of searching, even they ran out of energy. The mother publicly stated that it was time to let go of her daughter and accept the truth. The father clung to hope longer, but eventually he stopped giving interviews. In Sweden, a symbolic farewell ceremony was organized for Alina. It seemed that the story was over. But in the summer of 2017, A random group of tourists walked along the same path where the girl was last seen. The road passed by a dense spruce forest. One of the travelers noticed strange notches on the trunk of a pine tree. They were not like the usual initials or hearts that visitors sometimes leave behind. They were clear numbers carved deeply, as if with effort and desperation. At first, the company joked that it was a secret pirate code, but one of the tourists recognized a familiar format in the sequence: coordinates. They recorded them in their phone, entered them into the GPS, and saw the point on the map. The location was a few hundred meters away from the official trail in a ravine between rocks. When the tourists returned home, they told their friends about the discovery. One of them recalled the story of the missing Swedish girl. The comparison turned out to be eerie. She had disappeared in this very area 7 years ago. The information was passed on to the police. At first, the sheriff's department was cautious about the report. Over the years, they had heard various stories from visitors, from seeing ghosts to finding bones that later turned out to be animal remains. But the numbers on the tree were real. The district officer personally went to the site and confirmed that the notches looked old, but well preserved. The coordinates were accurate, in the format used by GPS navigators. The news immediately hit the media. The headlines read, "Case of missing tourist from Sweden, revived by coordinates carved into a tree." It came as a blow to the family. They had almost learned to live with the lack of an answer, but now the old wound had reopened. The mother told reporters, "I don't know if I can bear to hope again." The police reopened the case. Investigators pulled up all the archival materials, search maps, witness statements, helicopter reports. They found nothing new in the documents. It all boiled down to one detail. There was now a point on the map that had not been there 7 years ago. The experts argued. Some said that the coordinates could have been cut out by anyone even years after the disappearance. Others emphasized that the format of the recording was too specific, looking like a desperate attempt to leave a signal. And if Alina did it, then the last moments of her life took place in a different place than they had been looking for. The forest, which had remained silent for 7 years, once again became the center of attention. The coordinates on the trunk moved the story from the status of a cold case to a new phase. The investigators had to check this point, and what they would find there would change the perception of the entire tragedy. The coordinates carved into the trunk of the old pine tree turned out to be genuine. When the officers entered them into the GPS, the point on the map lit up with a pale green marker. It was located only a few hundred meters from the hiking trail, but in a place where no one would go voluntarily. There, the map only marked the unevenness of the terrain, a ravine stretching down between rocks covered with dense conifers. We decided to organize a small expedition. The group consisted of 3 policemen, 2 forensic experts, and a local ranger who knew the area. The base was set up in the same parking lot near the trailhead where the missing Swedish tourist's car had been found 7 years earlier. Now, this parking lot looked completely different. Instead of dozens of vacationers' cars, there was a black forensic van and several official SUVs. The departure to the coordinates was scheduled for the morning. The sun was just rising over the mountains when the group set out on the hike. Everyone carried not only their equipment, but also the feeling that this was no ordinary inspection. The coordinates carved into the wood could not have appeared just like that. At first, they followed a familiar path, but after a few hundred meters, the ranger pointed to the thickets. "This way." The trail bifurcated, and the right part descended sharply into the thicket. There was almost no wind. The air seemed heavy, filled with the resinous smell of pine trees. Everything was silent, broken only by the crackling of branches underfoot. After a few minutes, everyone felt the terrain change. The forest became denser. The light was harder to penetrate. Wet mosses and slippery stones appeared underfoot. The road turned into a difficult descent. From time to time, the experts checked the coordinates on the GPS, and the arrow inexorably led to the dark ravine, as if carved into the slope by a nature's knife. "If she really came here," one of the police officers said quietly, "there must have been a good reason. This is not a place to walk around." His words hung in the air. The ravine was deep and narrow. The slopes were overgrown with roots and bushes, like the walls of a trap. The group went down carefully, holding on to the trees. It was darker down there than they had expected. The sun barely broke through the crown. The atmosphere was depressing. Every step felt like an approach to something unknown. The GPS showed that the point was very close. When the ranger stopped, everyone looked where he pointed, a narrow crack between the stones, almost invisible behind the branches. The entrance to the ravine looked like a black abyss. The policeman stretched out yellow tape and began to document the place. One of the experts took out a camera, the other a metal probe to test the soil. Everyone felt a strange combination of professional concentration and growing inner fear. None of the group could help but think that if the girl herself had carved these coordinates, then she was here. It was here that her last hours took place. The officer who first approached the crack pushed aside a few branches. He saw a small natural ledge in the rock. It was dry inside, as if someone had once deliberately laid stones at the entrance to protect the space from rain. On the ground, he could see the remains of an old fire, charred branches, and a few rusty tin cans. It looked like a camp, but not a modern one. Everything was outdated, long abandoned. The experts began to clear the debris with careful movements, taking pictures of every detail. And then one of them found a plastic bag stuck between the stones. Inside was an object wrapped in a cloth. When it was unwrapped, everyone froze. It was a notebook. The cover was softened by time and moisture. The corners were split, but the pages were intact. It was a diary. It was seized as the main evidence. Experts immediately packed it in a special container to prevent further destruction of the paper. The atmosphere in the ravine changed. Even the most experienced police officers realized that this notebook could tell them more than the previous 7 years of searching. As the group walked back to the trail, there was a silence in the air that no one dared to break. Everyone felt that they had just touched someone else's secret, which could have been much more terrible than the official version of the accident. The police carefully brought the notebook out of the ravine. It was wrapped in several layers of thin polyethylene, stuck together by time. The material crumbled in their hands, but it fulfilled its main function. The pages inside were preserved. The cover was swollen with moisture, the edges were yellowed, but the pages were still readable. The find was immediately placed in a special container. At the base camp, the experts laid out the pages on a table under the lamps, using tweezers and thin gloves. The atmosphere was tense, like before opening a safe. Everyone realized that they were looking at the possible voice of the missing Alina Sundberg, the only one who could explain what happened 7 years ago. The first recordings date back to early July 2010, before she went into the mountains. She briefly described her impressions of the trip. "Denver is hot and noisy. I want quiet." This was followed by notes on route plans, grocery lists, and even an outline of a future thesis. It looked like an ordinary student diary, but on the pages dated the day of her disappearance, the tone changed. Alina described the beginning of the hike, meeting a couple from Texas, and a brief conversation with another hiker at a viewpoint. The following lines followed. The trail seems safe. The sky is clear. I write to distract myself from loneliness. The entries in the afternoon were fragmentary. The clouds gathered quickly. I heard thunder. I think the storm will be strong. We need to find shelter. The letters were smeared with water in the margins, as if she had written in the rain. The last pages that were read that evening amazed everyone. I went off the path. I saw smoke between the trees. At first I thought it was other tourists, but the place looked strange. There was no one there, only traces of a fire. Another excerpt. I think someone lives here. I don't know if it's safe. The pages ended at this point. Several sheets were torn out. It is clear that she was writing in a hurry. Her handwriting became uneven. The letters were shifted. One of the paragraphs read, "If I don't come back, someone will find me. I will carve the coordinates on a tree." The experts looked at each line in silence. For them, it was not just a find, but actual evidence. For the first time in 7 years, Alina's own words were heard. The diary proved that she had been alive for some time after her disappearance. It confirmed that she had gone off the main path and found a place that seemed dangerous to her. Whether she was there alone or had met someone remained a question. The document was packed in archival envelopes and sent for examination. Graphological analysis, ink testing, and searching for traces on the pages were ahead. But it was already clear that the diary would become the main key in the reopened case. The information leaked to the press. The headlines were sensational. Diary of missing tourist found in the mountains after 7 years. Journalists talked about messages from the grave and quoted the most disturbing passages. The family in Sweden was the first to learn about the discovery. The officers personally handed them copies of the pages. The mother confessed to journalists, "This is harder than the unknown." Now I can hear her voice and know how scared she was. The ravine where the cache was found was declared closed to visitors. Every meter was thoroughly checked. Now the police had proof that Alina could have been the victim of an accident or an encounter with someone who did not want witnesses. The diary stayed in the hiding place amidst silence and dampness for 7 years. It survived rains, snows, fires, and preserved the words of the girl who tried to leave a trace. And these words now opened the darkest stage of the investigation. In a Colorado laboratory, the diary was laid out on special tables under dimmable lights. Experts used magnifying lenses and digital scanners to capture every line, even if the ink had smeared or the paper had torn from moisture. The work lasted several days. The results were impressive. Despite the damage, most of the text was recovered. The first pages seemed completely ordinary. Alina was describing the scenery. The sky is so blue that my eyes hurt. The flowers along the trail smell pungent, completely different from home in Sweden. She wrote down the details of the route, the pace of her walk, even the smallest things. I rubbed a callus on my right foot. I need to buy another sunscreen. Everything looked like the notes of a traveler who wanted to remember the trip. In the following entries, fatigue appears. The climb is harder than I expected. The wind changes. Sometimes I feel as if someone is walking behind me, but I look around and there is no one. At the time, this did not seem strange, but then the tone changes. On one of the pages in the afternoon of July 11th, she wrote, "I see smoke between the trees. It's far away, but I'm sure it's not tourists. The smoke is not from a cooking fire, but from a big fire. When I came closer, I found no one, only freshly burnt stones." A few lines later, I heard footsteps, very clearly. I looked around. It was empty. The forest is too quiet. The birds are silent. The handwriting on these words was smeared, the ink smeared, as if she had written in a hurry. She went on to say, "I think someone lives here. I saw the remains of canned food, scattered rags. It doesn't look like tourists. Someone is spending the night here." This passage was one of the most disturbing. It contradicted the official version of an accidental death. If Alina had really stumbled upon a foreign camp, it meant a completely different scenario. In the margins of several sheets, words were written in large letters. Dangerous. Being watched. Need to return. The last entries looked chaotic. In one passage, she confessed, "I'm not sure where to go. I'll try to cut out the coordinates so that someone can find me. If I disappear, look for me there." Nearby are inaccurate tree diagrams, short lines that look like an attempt to fix a location. Investigators who read these pages noted that the girl wrote without any obvious signs of hallucinations or loss of consciousness. Her notes remained logical, even if there was a sense of fear in them. It did not look like the confusion of a lost tourist. It was a conscious signal of danger. The journalists who leaked the excerpts immediately made headlines. "I'm not alone in these mountains," they quoted lines from the diary. The family in Sweden experienced this for the second time. Instead of hope, they now had documentary evidence that their daughter's last hours were spent in an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. The atmosphere around the case changed dramatically. What had been considered an accident for 7 years now looked like a possible encounter with someone who was deliberately staying out of sight in the mountains. The diary became not just a memory of the last days. It turned into evidence that something much more dangerous than a random thunderstorm or a broken leg could be operating deep in the Rocky Mountains. And these words, written in a trembling hand, made the police return to the case with a new, much more alarming outlook. The last pages of the diary were damaged the most. Drops of water had blurred the letters, and the ink was spreading, leaving blue stains. Experts debated whether these were traces of rain or tears falling on the paper. The texts became fragmentary, the handwriting nervous and uneven. "It's dark. Someone was near me. I heard rustling behind the trees." A few lines follow, almost illegible. "I don't know where to go. I need to leave a sign. If I get lost, I want someone to find me." In the corner of the page, we can see a clearer writing. "I will carve the coordinates on a tree. It's the last thing I can do." Near this sentence, the handwriting was shaky. Some letters were crossed out and rewritten several times. The next entry looked like an attempt to describe the place. Short phrases that looked like instructions. "A large pine tree near the crossroads. A dry branch of a broken tree nearby." This confirmed that she was deliberately leaving landmarks, as if she knew she might not be able to get back. After that, the notes became even more fragmentary. Only a few words. Cold, rain, heard footsteps again. The last page raised the most questions. At the top, in big letters, "I am not alone." Below, "He came back." The dots at the end of the line were placed as if she had been interrupted or had hastily put down her pen. This was Alina's last known line. For investigators, this page became the key to the new version. The word "he" transformed the story from an assumption of an accident to a possible evidence of an encounter with a specific person. Who was he? A random tourist? A local hermit? A criminal fugitive? Or was it fear that created the image in her mind? The handwriting analysis showed that she wrote in a hurry, but without any signs of loss of comprehension. It was a conscious text composed in a state of panic. There were smudged lines in the margins of the sheet, as if she had touched it several times with a wet sleeve or palm. The family in Sweden, having received copies of the last pages, experienced a new shock. The mother told reporters, "I read those lines and felt like she was screaming out of the darkness, but no one heard her voice then." The media quoted only one sentence: "He is back." The headlines made a sensation out of it. Who was chasing the tourist in the mountains? The case, which had been considered closed for years, was now officially reclassified. It no longer looked like an accidental disappearance. The diary did not provide a definitive answer, but its last lines were a signal that turned the tragedy upside down. The atmosphere around the story changed. The Rocky Mountains once again looked not only majestic and harsh, but also dangerous, silent witnesses of someone else's presence. After the diary was published, the police officially reopened the case. The tone of the investigation changed. Instead of searching for the lost tourist, investigators now worked with the hypothesis of a possible criminal act. The most disturbing thing was the word "he" in the final entry. Who was behind this short sentence? The first step was to go back to the archives. It turned out that the area where Alina Sundberg disappeared had a dark history. In the 90s, a man from Colorado Springs disappeared there. His car was also found near the trail, but the hiker himself was never found. In 2003, a group of students reported strange traces of a camp deep in the forest, an old tent, scattered canned food, and homemade traps for small animals. At the time, it was attributed to careless hunters. Now, these cases have taken on a new color. Investigators raised criminal databases. There were several people with criminal records who, after being released, settled in the mountains, trying to live in seclusion. Special attention was paid to a man who escaped from house arrest in 2007. His traces were lost in this particular district. Then they searched for him for several months, but to no avail. Could he have settled somewhere in the mountains and remained unnoticed for years? A version of the hermit theory emerged. Local journalists unearthed dozens of legends. Hunters talked about fires they saw at night far from the trails. Tourists recalled feeling as if they were being watched. All of these stories were previously considered exaggerations, but after the line, "He's back," even investigators began to take them seriously. However, there was no evidence. They examined the ravine where the diary was found, with dogs and thermal imagers. There were no fresh tracks, only an old hiding place that could have belonged to Alina's temporary camp, or could have been left by someone else even earlier. No fingerprints or DNA suitable for analysis were found. The FBI got involved in the case. They drew a parallel with other disappearances in U.S. national parks. In most cases, people disappeared without a trace, and no evidence of tourist hunters was found. But it was the coincidence of details in Colorado that forced the agents to leave the small working group. In the media, the story took on a new meaning. Newspapers wrote, "A hermit in the Rockies," or "Who was stalking the Swedish tourist?" Each new headline added fuel to the fire. Local residents told journalists old rumors that a man lived in those mountains who avoided contact, or that they sometimes heard strange gunshots at night. All of this looked like fragments of a mosaic that no one could put together. For Alina's family, the new versions sounded like a curse. Her mother kept repeating, "I want to know the truth, even if it's scary." But the truth was slipping away. All the clues were cut off, as if someone was deliberately erasing the traces. The case was not closed, but we could not move forward either. All the threads led nowhere. Old archival records, legends, fragments of rumors. The forest remained as silent and indifferent as it had been 7 years before, when the girl from Stockholm disappeared. The police had only the diary and the last line, "He is back." This became the new symbol of the case. But there was no specific person behind it, no proven fact, just a shadow in the mountains that never had a name. Alina Sundberg's diary became the main exhibit in the case. It was placed in a special archive of the forensic department, but at the same time, copies of the pages were shown to journalists and even exhibited at press conferences. For the police, it was not only evidence, but also the only voice of the missing girl. Every line was read aloud, as if she had spoken through the years. Experts confirmed that the recordings were genuine, made by her. Analysis of the ink, paper, and handwriting left no doubt. They dated the last pages to July 11 and 12, 2010. This meant that after the other hikers saw her on the trail, she was still alive for at least a day. She tried to struggle, to navigate, to signal danger, but neither her body nor her personal belongings, except for her diary, were found. All new searches of the area ended in nothing. Dogs didn't pick up any tracks. Thermal imagers didn't reveal anything under the ground. The water bodies were also checked to no avail. The Rocky Mountains had swallowed her up just as easily as they had many others before. For the investigators, this was a paradox. On the one hand, they received confirmation. Alina had survived the storm and had indeed left signals. On the other hand, there was no progress. The case was reopened, but every thread was cut off. The only thing that remained were the words from the diary. "He's back." They turned into a mantra repeated by journalists and volunteers. Everyone tried to guess who that he was. Two versions emerged in society. One was that it was a random hermit who could not be identified. The second was that fear and fatigue made her feel like she was with someone, even if she was actually alone. But none of them could explain everything. Why then were the coordinates so clearly carved into the tree? Why did she leave detailed notes about someone else's camp? For the family, the diary became a double symbol. It was proof that their daughter lived and fought to the end. And at the same time, it was a confirmation of her fear that no one heard in time. The mother confessed, "I imagine her sitting with that notebook in the rain, and now we only have her words, not her." The Rocky Mountains have regained their silence. The search teams dispersed, the journalists left, and other tragedies filled the news feeds. But in the Colorado archives, there is a case that has not been officially closed. It has no answer, only physical evidence, a diary that speaks through the years. The truth remained there, in a dark ravine, among the pines and stone. The forest is silent, just like 7 years ago, and perhaps there will never be an answer.